My in-laws always treated me like a nobody, insisting that their son was the successful one. At a family dinner they mocked me for not working. I stayed quiet until the waiter came with the bill and handed it directly to me, the owner of the restaurant. It was one of those moments that could only be described as a reality-shattering surprise. We were all sitting around the dining table as usual at one of the family gatherings. I had learned over the years to keep quiet and let my husband's family say what they wanted about me, even when it hurt. I'd spent countless dinners biting my tongue while his family, especially his mother and sister, casually mocked me. But this time something was different. The laughter, the comments, the dismissive glances, they all hit harder tonight. I wasn't just the wife of their successful son. I was the invisible one, the one who didn't fit into their vision of success. There they were, sitting across from me, all their smug faces bright with self-importance. My husband, Mike, was in the middle of a conversation with his father, speaking about some new business deal he was involved in, all the while ignoring the cutting comments his family was making about me. I had long ago stopped trying to make them see me. They had already decided who I was. Someone who was always going to play second fiddle to their son. They couldn't see past the fact that Mike had been the breadwinner, the successful one, and in their eyes, I was just a stay-at-home wife who had no right to take credit for anything. Before we dive in, thank you for being here. If you enjoy stories of strength and empowerment, hit that subscribe button. It's free and helps us grow this incredible community. Let's get started. Tonight, however, I could feel something shift inside me. As his sister Lily raised her glass of wine with a mocking smile, she casually mentioned that it was so impressive how Mike had built everything on his own while I stayed home with nothing to show for it. I stayed silent like I always did. But this time I noticed Mike's eyes flicker toward me. It was a look I knew well, the kind of look that seemed to say, "I'm sorry you have to deal with them, but there's nothing I can do." And that was when it hit me. I was done being the quiet one. I had taken it for years, but not anymore. I was no longer going to let their insults go unchallenged. Then, just as I was about to say something, the waiter arrived. He wasn't carrying just any bill. He walked straight past Mike and his family, not acknowledging them at all, and handed the check to me. The room fell silent. My heart pounded in my chest. Every eye in the room turned toward me in shock. I didn't even need to look at the bill to know what had just happened. In that moment, my entire world was about to change. I looked up, meeting the waiter's gaze. He didn't flinch, his expression unchanged. "This is for you, ma'am," he said calmly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The sound of silverware clinking against plates filled the silence that followed. Mike's family exchanged puzzled glances, their mocking smiles slowly fading. For the first time in all the years I had been with Mike, I saw real confusion on their faces. "Excuse me." Mike's mother, Janet, spoke first. "Why would the bill be handed to you? This is Mike's family dinner, not yours." I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power building inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. I looked down at the bill, the weight of the moment sinking in. I could feel the tension in the air as everyone waited for an explanation. And that's when I realized the one thing they didn't know. I was the owner of the restaurant. I stood up slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. My voice didn't shake as I spoke, even though my heart was racing. "Actually, I own this place," I said, my words falling heavy in the air. The look of disbelief on their faces was priceless, but I wasn't finished yet. "I've been working quietly for years, building this from the ground up. Every penny I've earned, every success I've achieved, none of it was handed to me. It wasn't a gift from Mike or anyone else. It was mine." The room fell into complete silence. The waiter didn't need to say another word, his presence almost irrelevant now. Janet, Mike's mother, opened her mouth but nothing came out. Lily stared at me, her mouth agape, as if she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. Mike, meanwhile, looked like he had seen a ghost. I could see the shock and confusion in his eyes. "Wait, you own this place?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something in Mike's eyes. Something I couldn't quite place, but it wasn't pride. It was regret. I'd had enough of his passive support over the years, and now, this sudden realization of how little he truly knew about me made everything click into place. It wasn't just the family that had been undermining me all these years. Mike had been complicit in it, silently allowing his family to disrespect me. That had been the breaking point. Mike opened his mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said, my voice firm. You and your family have treated me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. Well, here's the truth. I've been more successful than any of you ever realized, and tonight you're going to see exactly how much I've built on my own. The shock on Mike's face was something I wouldn't forget. His eyes searched mine, but I didn't look away. For the first time in our entire relationship, I wasn't going to be the one who looked down or apologized. It was his turn to feel what it was like to be completely blindsided, to have the world he thought he knew come crashing down around him. The next few moments felt like they stretched on forever. His family, still in shock, murmured among themselves, trying to process what had just happened. I stood there, silently, allowing the weight of the revelation to sink in. I could feel their gazes on me, some filled with disbelief, others tinged with anger. But it didn't matter anymore. In the end, it wasn't just about proving a point to Mike's family. It was about reclaiming my dignity and showing them that I was no longer the quiet wife they could mock. I wasn't a nobody, and I was done letting anyone treat me that way. Tonight I was in control. And it felt better than I could have ever imagined. The silence that filled the room was suffocating. It was as though everything in that moment had been put on pause, and time itself had decided to hold its breath. I stood there, facing my husband's family, their shocked expressions a stark contrast to the calm I was trying desperately to maintain. The waiter had just handed me the bill, and I had casually revealed that I owned the restaurant. Now, as I stood there in the center of their disbelief, my mind was replaying everything that had led me to this exact point. Growing up, I had never imagined myself in this kind of situation. I came from humble beginnings, raised in a small town where everyone knew everyone. My parents worked hard to make ends meet, but they never complained. I learned early on the value of hard work and perseverance. I had dreams, yes, but they weren't the kind of dreams that would make me famous or get me accolades. I just wanted to be respected, to prove that I was capable of more than what people assumed about me. And yet, as the years passed, I found myself married to a man who, despite his love for me, had unknowingly helped perpetuate the image of me as someone who didn't have much to offer beyond being a wife. Mike and I had met in college. He was charming, ambitious, and undeniably successful even back then. He had big dreams, and I had admired that. I, on the other hand, was more reserved, focused on my studies, quietly making plans for the future. I wasn't one to boast about my accomplishments, but I had a drive that couldn't be ignored. After graduation, we started dating, and soon after we were married. I had always supported his career, but somewhere along the way I started losing sight of my own path. His family too seemed to put me in a box. I was the wife, but never the equal. Mike's family always saw him as the shining star, the one who would achieve great things. And they were right, he did. But somewhere along the line, they decided that I wasn't contributing enough. At family dinners it was always the same. They would praise Mike for his latest achievements, his promotions, his business deals. And then, almost as an afterthought, they would turn to me and ask, "So, what have you been doing lately?" The tone was never one of genuine interest. It was condescending, almost as if they expected me to be nothing more than a stay-at-home wife. And despite my own growing discomfort with it all, I stayed silent. I stayed silent because I loved Mike and I didn't want to rock the boat. I stayed silent because I thought that someday he would see me for who I really was, and maybe, just maybe, he would stand up for me. But that day never came. In the beginning, I had told myself that the family's disregard for me was just their way of expressing love for Mike. After all, they had always been a tight-knit family. But the truth was harder to ignore. They didn't respect me. And even worse, Mike didn't see it. For years, I had silently carried the weight of their judgment, thinking it was just a phase, thinking I would eventually earn their approval. But as time passed, I realized that nothing I did would ever change their perception of me. There were small moments that began to build up over time. Like when Janet, Mike's mother, casually told me that it was a good thing I had Mike to take care of me. Or when Lily, his sister, would laugh and say, "You don't need a job, right? You've got Mike to handle everything for you." It wasn't just that they were undermining my worth. It was that Mike didn't see it. He didn't hear the snide remarks. He didn't notice the way his mother dismissed me in favor of him. The tipping point came one night when I overheard a conversation between Mike and his father. I had been standing just outside the study, gathering my thoughts, when I heard my name mentioned. "I don't know why she just doesn't get it," Mike had said. "She's not cut out for the kind of work I do. She just doesn't have the drive, the ambition." I remember feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. All this time I had been silently fighting, striving to build something for myself, but he had never seen it. He didn't even understand how hard I had worked, how much I had sacrificed. He was too wrapped up in his own success to see mine. The truth was, I had been silently building my own empire, working day and night to create something that was mine, something I could be proud of. But I had done it quietly, so quietly that nobody had noticed. Not even Mike. I was no longer the woman who could sit idly by, pretending that everything was fine. I realized that if I wanted to be seen, truly seen for the person I was and the things I had accomplished, I would have to make them see me. But more than that, I wanted to show Mike, his family, and myself that I was capable of far more than they had ever believed. I was done being the shadow in the background. I knew it wouldn't be easy. For years, I had held on to the belief that if I just kept quiet and played my part, things would eventually change. But that had never happened. Now I was going to change things. I was going to show them all who I really was. That's when the idea struck me. It was bold and it was risky, but it was the only way to make an impact. I would make them see me, make them realize that I wasn't just Mike's wife. I wasn't just a stay-at-home woman who had no ambition. I was more than that. I had built something from nothing, and now it was time to let everyone see what I had accomplished. I started planning. I reached out to the restaurant where we were going to have dinner. It wasn't just any restaurant. It was a place I had built from the ground up. I had invested years of hard work into creating it, and now it was finally going to serve as the backdrop for the moment when everything changed. I arranged for everything to go perfectly. From the moment we walked in, the evening would be set in motion. And then came the dinner. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when everything would come to a head. I walked into that room fully aware of the judgment in the air. They were going to mock me, dismiss me just like they always had. But this time they wouldn't be able to ignore me. Not when I was the one holding the keys to the future. Not when I was the one who had built it all. The dinner table was set, but it felt like an arena. Each piece of cutlery and glassware just another prop in the performance that was about to unfold. Mike had no idea what I had planned. I could see the excitement in his eyes as he discussed his latest venture with his father, his voice filled with that familiar, self-assured tone that had always made him the center of attention. But as he spoke, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on me, the tension building as I steeled myself for what was about to happen. This was not just another dinner. This was the moment I would change everything, not just for me but for the family who had so casually dismissed me for years. I could feel their eyes on me. Janet, his mother, barely masking her disdain as she sipped her wine, the corners of her mouth curling into a knowing smile. She had always made it clear that she thought I was beneath them, never good enough for her son. And Lily, Mike's sister, sitting there with that condescending grin of hers, like she held all the answers to life. They were so comfortable in their little world, so used to their roles as the successful family, that they didn't even see me anymore. But tonight that would change. I could hear them speaking in hushed tones now, their voices growing louder as they discussed everything under the sun except for me. They were so wrapped up in themselves, so caught in the illusion of their own superiority, that they had no idea what was about to unfold. I looked over at Mike, whose attention was still fixed on his father, and I realized just how deep the divide had grown between us. For years I had been his silent partner, always supporting him, always lifting him up, while my own aspirations were pushed to the side, invisible beneath the weight of his career and family expectations. The waiter came to refill our drinks and I took a moment to steady myself. My heart raced, but I refused to let the nerves show. This was the culmination of everything I had been working for, all the years of quiet struggle, all the times I had been belittled or overlooked. Tonight I wasn't just going to reveal my success. I was going to show them how wrong they had been to underestimate me. I had spent too long in the shadows of their judgments and I was done with it. When the waiter finally approached with the bill, I could feel the energy in the room shift. Mike, unaware of what was coming, reached out to take the check. But the waiter walked right past him, bypassing his extended hand and heading straight for me. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. Janet's face tightened, and Lily's grin faltered as the waiter handed me the bill without a word. I could feel their gazes on me, sharp and accusatory. Mike looked confused, but there was a flicker of realization in his eyes. I took the bill in my hands, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. For the first time in years, I was no longer hiding behind my husband's shadow. I wasn't the quiet wife who had to pretend to be content with her place. I wasn't just Mike's accessory, his silent supporter. I had built something of my own and now it was time for them to see it. I looked up slowly, meeting Mike's eyes for the first time that evening. The tension between us was palpable, like the quiet before a storm. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air, and I knew in that moment that the truth was about to come crashing down. "I own this restaurant," I said, my voice calm, but the power in my words undeniable. The silence that followed was deafening. Janet's mouth hung open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Lily's expression shifted from mockery to confusion, and even Mike seemed stunned. For a moment nobody moved, nobody spoke. It was as if the entire world had paused. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I continued. "I didn't just marry Mike and become part of this family. I worked for everything I have. I built this place from the ground up, while you all stood by and assumed I had nothing to offer." I could feel their eyes boring into me, but I didn't look away. I wasn't going to let them see me break, not now, not when I was so close to finally being seen for who I really was. Mike's face was pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Janet, too, looked lost for words, the smirk she usually wore now replaced with something far less confident. Lily, who had always prided herself on her ability to belittle me, seemed utterly stunned. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to be anything more than the quiet wife who stayed home while Mike built his empire. But I had built my own quietly in the background. And now they would have to reckon with that. The tension in the room was suffocating. The kind of tension that builds slowly like a storm on the horizon waiting to break. I could see the wheels turning in Mike's mind as he processed what I had just said. His eyes flickered between me and his family, searching for something, anything to explain what was happening. But there was no explanation. This was the truth. And in that moment I realized that I had been living a lie for too long. Letting them see me as nothing more than a passive participant in my own life. No more. But there was something more to this revelation. Something deeper that I hadn't yet told them. The truth wasn't just that I owned the restaurant. It was that I had been holding the family's financial future in my hands, even while they dismissed me. The investments I had made, the risks I had taken, all of it had been carefully planned. And while they were busy congratulating Mike on his success, they had no idea that it was my hard work, my sacrifice, and my vision that had played an instrumental role in their comfortable lives. Mike's expression shifted. At first there was confusion, then disbelief, and finally regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that he had been blind to everything I had done for so long. He had never truly understood what I was capable of. And now the moment of reckoning had arrived. The silence was broken only by the clink of the glass as Lily set it down on the table. "How long have you been hiding this from us?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. It wasn't a question, at least not one meant to understand. It was an accusation. But it didn't matter anymore. I had said what I needed to say. The truth was out and there was no taking it back. The room was no longer the comfortable, familiar space it had been just moments before. It was charged with tension, with the realization that the dynamic had shifted, perhaps forever. The foundation of everything they thought they knew about me had crumbled, and now they had to reckon with the new reality I had revealed. In that moment I knew I had done the right thing. It wasn't just about showing them who I was. It was about showing myself who I was. The woman who had been buried beneath their expectations for so long had finally risen. And now there was no going back. The room remained silent for what seemed like an eternity after my revelation. My eyes scanned the faces around the table. Mike's family, once so confident and self-assured, now looked bewildered and uncomfortable. I could see the mix of emotions playing out across their faces. Disbelief, confusion, and perhaps a hint of regret. It was clear that they had underestimated me. And yet, as much as I wanted to savor the moment, I knew that this wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to show them that I wasn't the passive wife they thought I was. I needed to make them understand the full scope of what I had been doing behind the scenes, and most importantly, I needed to make Mike see how wrong he had been all these years. In the days following that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth had only scratched the surface. Yes, they knew now that I owned the restaurant, but that wasn't all. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was how much more I had built. My restaurant was just the beginning. I had invested in multiple properties, made smart business decisions, and quietly, without anyone's knowledge, I had created a network that was steadily growing in power and influence. I wasn't just a wife. I wasn't just a silent partner in Mike's world. I had become a force to be reckoned with on my own terms. And that's when the idea hit me. It wasn't enough to just tell them. I needed to show them. I needed to make them feel the weight of their years of dismissive behavior. I wasn't angry, not in the way they might have expected. What I felt now was something far more powerful, a deep, unshakable resolve. I wasn't just going to take my place in the world. I was going to make them understand exactly what they had missed all these years. I would do it in a way that would make them question their own judgment and, perhaps for the first time, make Mike realize the true cost of his complacency. I started planning carefully. It had to be precise. If I was going to execute this plan, it couldn't be rushed or haphazard. I would need to tap into the resources I had built over the years, the networks I had quietly cultivated. I knew that Mike's family was always so quick to applaud his business acumen, always so willing to turn a blind eye to the work I had been doing. Well, I would take that very same business acumen and use it to turn the tables on them. It began with the restaurants. I had invested in several properties under different names, always keeping a low profile. But the real magic of my plan lay in the way I could tie all of these ventures together, make them interdependent in a way that would leave Mike's family with no option but to face the consequences of their past treatment of me. One night I made a few phone calls. It wasn't anything extravagant. I didn't need to create a spectacle. Instead, I worked behind the scenes, orchestrating deals that would come to fruition at just the right time. I had already contacted the suppliers who had always treated me with respect. People who had seen the potential in me long before Mike's family had even noticed. They were ready to help. I secured contracts that would ensure the next few weeks would unfold exactly as I planned. The goal wasn't to destroy anyone. It was to make them realize the delicate balance they had taken for granted for so long. Over the next few days, I could sense Mike's confusion. He had tried calling me multiple times, but I didn't pick up. I needed him to feel the weight of his own ignorance. The worst thing I could do right now was let him off easy. He had been complicit in this. He had allowed his family to disrespect me for years, and now it was time for him to fully grasp the consequences of that. The tension between us grew, and I could see it in his eyes whenever he looked at me. There was a deep regret there, but there was also something else. Something that reminded me of the man I had married, the man who had always been so focused on his own success that he failed to notice mine. He had been blind, and now that blindness was beginning to crack. But I knew better than to give him comfort too soon. He needed to see that I wasn't going to stand by and watch him continue to let his family trample over me. As the days passed, I could feel the change in the air. Mike's phone calls were now mixed with questions. Questions about my business, questions about my future plans. He was trying to understand what had been happening in the background. But what he didn't know was that I had already set everything in motion. The first part of my plan unfolded on a quiet Wednesday. I invited Mike's family to another dinner, but this time it wasn't at a restaurant. No, this time it was in the heart of the business I had built. They walked into the private dining room, unaware that they were about to witness the full scale of what I had been doing all these years. I had arranged for a series of displays showcasing the various projects I had quietly invested in, properties, startups, and partnerships. All of them linked to the very thing they had dismissed as insignificant. The look on Janet's face when she saw the first display of my work was priceless. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at Mike, but he was still trying to process the enormity of it all. This wasn't just about a restaurant anymore. This was a full-scale operation, a vision I had cultivated and nurtured from the ground up. And as I watched them slowly come to realize the magnitude of what they had failed to see, I knew that I had made my point. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about respect. But the real twist came when I finally handed Mike the key to a new project. A project I had kept under wraps for months. This new venture, a luxury hotel that would rival some of the finest in the city, was mine. The contract was signed and everything was ready to go. It was all in his name, everything we had discussed, everything he had believed was his. But it wasn't his at all. It was mine, and I had created it while they all sat there blind to my efforts. As I handed Mike the key, his face drained of color. The weight of the truth settled over him, and for the first time, I saw him truly see me. Not just as his wife, not just as the woman who had been by his side, but as an equal. It was too late for apologies, too late for explanations. The time for that had passed. But I had gotten what I wanted. I had made my point. Mike's family stared in stunned silence. The tables had turned, and I wasn't just a passive spectator in their world anymore. I was the one with the power now, and they would never forget that. The true measure of respect wasn't in their acknowledgement, but in the way I had risen above their petty judgments and stood tall on my own. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying victory of all. The tension in the room was palpable as Mike took the key from my hand. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The weight of the truth hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Mike's eyes moved from the key to the documents laid out on the table, the realization slowly dawning on him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the desperation for answers. His hands trembled slightly as he looked back at me, almost as if he was searching for an explanation that didn't come. But this time there was no explanation I could give him. There was nothing left to say. I've spent years building this, I said, my voice calm but firm. And not once did I get the respect I deserved from you or your family. You had no idea, did you? No idea what I was capable of while you were out there chasing your dreams and forgetting about me. Well, now you know. The silence that followed was thick, every second stretching into what felt like an eternity. His family sat motionless, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Janet's expression was frozen, her mouth slightly agape as she processed what was unfolding before her eyes. Lily, too, was speechless, her usual smugness replaced by a stunned silence. This wasn't the dinner they had imagined. This wasn't the spectacle they were used to. But it was the one they had unknowingly set in motion when they underestimated me. Mike finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. I don't understand. How did I not know? Why didn't you tell me? His eyes were wide with guilt now, a sharp contrast to the confident man I had known for so long. I could feel the bitterness rising in me, but I swallowed it down. There was no place for bitterness anymore. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would finally get the respect I deserved. Not from his family, not from Mike, but from myself. I was finally owning my success, not as a quiet partner, not as an accessory to his life, but as someone who had worked tirelessly to build something of my own. You didn't see me, I said quietly, my gaze steady. You never saw me. And now you can't unsee it. I motioned to the documents, the contracts, the projects that spanned the table. This is who I am. This is what I've built. I didn't need your permission and I didn't need your approval. But it sure would have been nice to have had it. The words were out before I could stop them, but it felt good to finally speak my truth. For too long, I had been the silent observer, the one who stayed in the background, playing the supportive wife while Mike and his family took center stage. But now I was done. I was done being the quiet one. I was done pretending that my success didn't matter. Mike's gaze flickered between me and his family, a mix of emotions playing out on his face. Surprise, guilt, confusion. It was clear he was struggling to process what was happening, to come to terms with the fact that everything he had taken for granted was shifting beneath his feet. But it wasn't just Mike who was struggling. His family, too, was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Janet, who had always looked at me as though I was beneath her, was now looking at me with something I couldn't quite place. Was it respect? Or fear? Whatever it was new. It was something she hadn't felt toward me before. Lily, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. The smugness that had once been a permanent fixture on her face was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability I had never seen in her. She wasn't the confident, sharp-tongued sister anymore. She was just a woman, realizing for the first time that she had misjudged me completely. And while part of me wanted to revel in the moment, to bask in the satisfaction of their discomfort, I knew better. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me. This was about reclaiming my power and owning the life I had built. Mike's voice cracked as he finally spoke again. I never meant to hurt you, he said, his words heavy with regret. I don't know. I guess I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I didn't respond right away. There was nothing more to say. He hadn't seen me. That was the truth of it. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, so caught up in his own success, that he hadn't even noticed the woman beside him, the woman who had been quietly working, quietly sacrificing to make a future for both of them. And now it was too late. I had done this for myself. I had built this for myself. And if he wanted to be part of it, he would have to work to earn it. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor interrupted the silence. Mike stood up, his face pale, his hands trembling. He took a step toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. No, I said firmly. Don't come any closer. This isn't about fixing things. It's about understanding. His face crumpled with emotion, and for the first time in our marriage I saw vulnerability in him. It was a side of him I had never seen before. It was clear he felt guilty, but guilt wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't enough to undo the years of neglect, the years of dismissing me. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt that had been building up inside me for so long. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Mike, I continued, my voice steady. But I am asking for your respect. Not just as your wife, but as the woman I am, the woman I've always been. The room was silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could feel the shift happening. Slow but undeniable. The dynamic had changed. Mike's family had never seen me as their equal, but now they couldn't ignore me. They couldn't pretend that I was just some accessory to Mike's success. I was his equal, and more importantly, I was my own person. I had built something worth respecting, and that was something I would never let them take away from me again. As I stood there facing the family that had once belittled me, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It wasn't about causing pain. It was about showing them my strength, my resilience. It was about proving to myself that I was more than their assumptions. And as I saw the regret on Mike's face and the stunned silence around the table, I knew I had won. Not because they admitted defeat, but because I had finally found my voice. And that, I realized, was the most powerful revenge of all. As the night wore on, the tension in the room slowly began to dissipate, but the weight of the events that had unfolded lingered like a cloud over us. Mike stood there, his hands trembling, not knowing what to say next. It wasn't just the key I had handed him, or the papers that laid scattered across the table. It was the realization that everything he thought he knew about me, about our marriage, had been shattered. There was no going back from this moment, no erasing the truth that had been laid bare for everyone to see. I had done what I set out to do. I had made Mike, his family, and even myself see the woman I had become. The woman who had worked tirelessly, quietly, to build a life and a legacy that was mine alone. But as I stood there watching him struggle to come to terms with everything I had revealed, I couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Was this what I had been waiting for? The vindication, the acknowledgement? Or was it something more, something deeper that I had been searching for all along? Mike's voice broke the silence, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a pang of uncertainty. I never knew, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never understood what you were doing, what you were capable of. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something in them that I had longed for but never truly received. Genuine remorse. But it was too late. The years of neglect, the years of being sidelined in favor of his success, could not be undone with a few words. He had never seen me, not the way I needed him to. And while I could feel the sorrow in his voice, I also knew that I had finally found the strength to stand on my own, without needing his approval or validation. You didn't see me because you were too busy seeing what you wanted to see, I said, my voice calm, but there was a sharpness to it that I couldn't quite hide. I've spent years supporting you, putting everything I had into making our life work, while you and your family dismissed me as nothing more than a bystander. Well, now you can see me. You can see everything I've built. And you can see that I don't need your approval. Mike opened his mouth as if to say something, but I held up my hand, silencing him. There's nothing more to say, I continued. I've been living in the shadow of your family's expectations for too long, and I'm done. I'm done being the wife who stays quiet, who waits for the scraps of attention. I've earned my place in this world, and I don't need your family to acknowledge it for me to know my worth. His face softened, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who was just beginning to understand the consequences of his inaction. He had been so focused on his own success, so wrapped up in his own ambitions, that he had failed to see the woman who had stood by him, supporting him every step of the way. And now he was paying the price. The rest of his family sat in stunned silence, unable to process the revelation before them. Janet, who had always looked at me with disdain, now seemed almost remorseful. But her apology, if there was one, was never spoken. Lily, who had been so quick to mock me in the past, now seemed unsure of herself, her eyes darting nervously between me and Mike. The power dynamics had shifted, and it was clear that they were beginning to understand the full extent of what they had overlooked. But I wasn't looking for their approval. I wasn't waiting for their acknowledgement. The truth was, I had already moved past that. I had proven to myself that I was capable of so much more than I had been given credit for. And now I was free from the shackles of their expectations. I was free to live my life on my terms, to build something that was truly mine. As I stood there facing the family that had once dismissed me, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had done it. I had proven that I was more than just the wife in the background, more than just a supporting role in someone else's story. I had written my own narrative, one where I was the protagonist, the hero of my own journey. Mike stood there still processing everything, but I could see the shift in him. He had finally seen me for who I truly was, and I could tell that he was beginning to understand the depth of his mistakes. But the truth was, I no longer needed his redemption. I didn't need him to fix things because I had already fixed myself. I had taken control of my own destiny, and that was something no one could ever take away from me. In the days that followed, things began to change. Mike, though still struggling with the reality of what had happened, started making efforts to understand me better. He began asking questions about my businesses, my plans, and my vision. And for the first time, I felt like he was actually listening, not out of obligation but because he genuinely wanted to understand who I had become. But I knew deep down that it was too late. The years of being unseen, unheard, had left a scar that could never be fully healed. As for his family, their attitude shifted too. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but over time I saw a change in them. Janet, while still maintaining a certain level of reserve, began to treat me with more respect. Lily, who had always been the most vocal in her criticisms, started to acknowledge my achievements, albeit begrudgingly. But none of this mattered to me anymore. I had already proven that I didn't need their approval to succeed. I had already proven that I could stand on my own 2 feet. The final twist came when I received an unexpected call from Mike's father, who had been strangely quiet during the entire ordeal. "I never realized," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I never realized what you were doing. You've shown us all that we were wrong. And for that I'm sorry." His words, though late, carried weight. But they were not what I had been waiting for. What I had been waiting for was my own self-acceptance, and in that moment I realized that I had already achieved it. I had set out to prove my worth not to them but to myself. And in the end, that was the most powerful victory of all.